So how was your guys' holiday weekend? Anybody do anything really fun or really boring?
If you count hanging out with your grandmother and helping around the house, boring? No.
I guess it really depends on how big the house is and how nice your grandma is.
She's pretty nice. I help her around a few things that she can't get to, and in return, I get to watch TV with her.
Oh, that's good. That's a good exchange. How about you, Emma?
No, I didn't really do anything, just spent time with family.
Okay, well that's still good. How about you, Emmeline? Or is it Emmeline?
It's Emmeline, but close enough. I just had to babysit, so same situation, just working.
Well, I'm just really glad to hear that none of you guys did anything outrageously dangerous or anything. I just we drove from St. George to Syracuse Saturday morning and then back Sunday night, and we were able to avoid most of the dangerous traffic, which is really good. I just get really concerned about Labor Day is one of the most dangerous days to be driving in the state. And to hear that you guys are okay is, and you didn't have any scary adventures, that's really good to hear. Well, today I wanted to revisit the tools of artistic critique, talk about that for just a little bit. And then I wanted to see if anybody had questions about the defining. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to talk about being a diversity collaborator. And then I wanted to answer questions about volumetric form with line, if anybody's having issues with that, and talk a little bit about building a structure with skin. One of the things that I think is really important as we go on is I really appreciate it when you guys tell me, I think the workload is too heavy. We need to change the due dates. Like several people pointed out that the due dates I thought I had changed had not been changed, and stuff like that. Or a couple people even told me that links that were supposed to have been fixed were not fixed, and nobody could use them. And so I really appreciate when you guys let me know stuff like that. So to recap the artistic critique, I'm going to pull up the page here so I can share it with everybody. All righty, here we go. All right, can everybody see this page?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. Excellent. These 4 tools of artistic critique, we are applying them specifically to art, but they can apply to absolutely everything. Anything in your academic career, anything in your future job. It doesn't really matter what you do. These tools of critique can be adapted to pretty much anything. If it's a situation rather than art, then you change the description to describing the situation. And this is a really good way to think with intent so that you can resolve issues, solve problems, or recognize how good something is. It doesn't have to be used just to generate a better result. It can be used to honestly and genuinely appreciate the efforts of somebody else and be able to give them articulate comments about their work that is really beneficial to them as a person. Like, for example, if you have a job as a manager, using the tools of artistic critique and applying them to work that you've noticed somebody do on your team can really do an awful lot for their self-esteem, as well as improve their future workflow too. So these 4 steps: description, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation. If you look at them in that order, you can kind of see, well, I hope you can see that we start generating a little bit more personal interaction as we go down the list. Like we start involving our imagination a little bit more. With description, it is primarily just a pretty much bare bones outline of how the thing exists. Essentially, you're just talking about its traits. In art specifically, you'd be talking about things like size and shape and colors. With analysis, you are looking at the object and you're thinking how it came to be. So you start injecting a little bit more of yourself. With interpretation, you are starting to imagine what the artist meant behind what they were saying, what they did, or whoever the creator originator is. And then the last one, this is almost entirely your point of view, because you're rendering a judgment as to whether or not the thing is successful. I know that we talked about this previously as well, but it is really good to revisit it and re-talk about it several times, simply because it is such a good tool to have to help you as you interact with things. Well, I'm going to do something here that I hope everybody appreciates. Let's see. Give me just a second here. All right, excellent. I found a terrific picture. Oh, and of course I can't get to it. That is just a little bit frustrating. Okay, we'll use this one. I'm going to stop sharing that screen and start sharing a different one. All right, who can tell me what this is? Does anybody know?
A face on a mountain.
Yeah, it's a face on a mountain. Specifically, this is just a little ways away from Mount Rushmore. This is the Crazy Horse monument that people have been working on for quite a while. It's actually, I believe, a Hungarian family of sculptors who migrated to the United States and then fell in love with the Dakota Sioux, and he designed and the family started building this gigantic Crazy Horse sculpture. To give you an idea of the scale, have any of you been to Mount Rushmore?
Nope.
Nope.
Mount Rushmore, if you look at old-timey photos of it, there are 4 faces of United States presidents, and each of the faces are about, I believe, 15 or 20 feet high. You see this face in the middle of the image here. All 4 of those faces from Mount Rushmore, so the entirety of Mount Rushmore fits into that face. that gives you, hopefully that gives you a sense of how big this thing is. Yeah, well, that's a little bit of background. Now let's apply the 4 tools of artistic critique to this image. Who would like, I'm going to just call it out. Each of us, there's 4 of us here. Each of us will take one of the 4 tools. The first one is describe. Who would like to take a stab at describing this image?
I can describe it.
Okay, go for it.
So the image is set in what looks like mountains in a foresty range, but the focal point is on the mountain itself. There's a face that is sculpted into the mountain, and then what looks like a longer mountain coming out from under the face. And you can see carved lines where they are probably intending to carve more out of the sculpture itself, but they haven't gotten that far yet.
All right, that's really good. Excellent. What colors do you see? And what do you think the material might be?
We see a lot of tans and browns, and then in the backgrounds, blues and greens. And the material of the sculpture itself looks like it's probably stone.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Now, what kind of style do you think the face looks like it's made with? Does it look more abstract or does it look more classical?
No, it looks more classical.
Yeah, it looks to me, this is the kind of style that a lot of the Washington, D.C. monuments used in faces of different things. So yeah, very much, very classical. That's an excellent description. Nicely done. Now, who would like to take a stab at the next step? Do you remember what the next step is? Does anybody remember what the next step is?
I don't, but I can probably take a stab at it.
Okay. The next step is analysis, where we try to examine the how. Now, Emma talks quite a bit about what this looks like, what the materials are, and a lot of that information. Now we're going to kind of describe this, not describe it, excuse me. We're going to use a little bit of our imagination and try to discuss how this was made. All right, Nick, you want to try that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I see that they have like dug in the little caverns up to the hill, so they are able to like drive their excavators, their dump trucks, and then one of the trucks that pushes the dirt to one pile. They can all drive it up or around the hill, and then all the way back down. And from what I could see, they dump all the excess rocks almost over the side of the biggest and longest road. And then there's a bigger hole out near like the top of the mountain, which I'm pretty sure that's where they go through, I think, because then there's another line that goes rounding it, but I'm pretty sure
You're
that's where
talking
they
about
go
this
from.
area here?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you think they created this?
I know that some of the Egyptians had used chisel, and they probably used like scaffoldings to get up there, and like I don't know what the technical term for it is. They like hit the rocks up and start chipping it off little by little to
Okay.
form the face of the mountain.
All right. I think those are really good observations, because so it looks like this is carved with huge excavator equipment, just like you'd use on a construction site. And then where the detail is, they probably used more delicate chisels, maybe jackhammers, and then refining the surface with hand chisels and equipment. So yeah, very good, excellent. I think all that is just right. Now, the next step is analysis. And this is where we start getting at the why. Emmeline, would you like to take a stab at talking about this? Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Well, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Bad connection. When analyzing this, I'm super curious as to the purpose behind it. I'd love to know what the reasoning is, if it's in behalf of something. I would say that's my biggest question.
Right. If I tell you that this is overseen by the Indian University of North America and the Sioux Council of the Dakotas, and it is just like 75 miles away from Mount Rushmore, how does that affect how you analyze it?
Sorry, it's kind of loud, but I would have to say that it probably serves maybe like a political purpose. There's probably a lot of passion behind the project, especially based off of like a university running it and being next to Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if we find Crazy Horse was one of the survivors of Little Bighorn, and he represents somebody who brought indigenous peoples together and helped them solidify their own identity. As European colonizers were coming into their territory. Does that kind of inform how you analyze this as well?
Sorry, me and my husband share a car, so I have to go pick him up, but I'm still listening on my phone.
Okay.
You know,
well, I will finish. I will finish the analyze then. So don't worry about that.
Sorry about that. I didn't think
No,
about
that's no
planning
problem.
ahead with it, but I'm still listening.
Okay. Now, we mentioned that this face is done in the classical style that is shared by other monuments that have been done to commemorate American history. And knowing that the placement that the Dakota Sioux Council oversees this in conjunction with the university. This is in the Black Hole Hills. The subject matter is Crazy Horse, who was actually hunted by spies from the federal government because they thought, like Malcolm X, he represented a real danger to the establishment. Knowing all that, then we can start extrapolating that, and then we also know that it was a Hungarian family that started building this. So it wasn't began by Native Americans. It was begun by immigrants to the United States that found a home here. So all these kinds of things come together, and I think what this, if we analyzing this, I think on one hand we can see that it is a monument declaring pride and self-identification as an indigenous person, and it's also reclaiming power or claiming power. It's very empowering to the people that it's a monument for. But I also think that it's exciting to me because this is a Hungarian family. So the European immigrants building it for or to celebrate indigenous people, it also represents a gigantic bridge connecting cultures that historically have clashed a lot. And one of the this was begun, I believe, back in the late 50s, and the family is still working on it. one of the reasons it's taking so long is that they are building this entirely through just self-directed donations. People who want to donate money, and then the family works on it. And there are also sculptures. Let's see if I can find. Okay, here's an image that shows what the family is intending. So that hole that trucks drive through to get to the other side, there's going to be a separation between Crazy Horse's left arm and the neck of the horse that he's riding. So this, when it gets all done, is going to be really amazing. But I think all those things coming together, this is a sculpture that is a passion project and a monument for a proud Indigenous group of people, but it is designed and is being built by people from outside who are from the same group of people that hunted these folks down. And so it not only is a monument to a national hero for the Dakota Sioux, but it is also a monument celebrating bridge building. So I think it's absolutely fantastic as that. So that's the analysis. Then when we evaluate it, I think looking at this is very clearly done in that classical style phase as other monuments. And this, even though it is not finished at all, it has a lot of work to do, it is still, the scale is inspiring. The work that has been done is inspiring. The fact, now you probably don't know this, but not all the fissures in the rock do things the way that they're supposed to. And so there have been some explosions and some unfortunate accidents over the years. So this sculpture has had to be redesigned a couple of times to match the new size and shape of the mountain as they're working on this. And I think the fact that this is not abandoned, the fact that it is funded by people who want to see it come to fruition, and that it is designed and being built by an immigrant family to the U.S., I think all of those things, for a group of people that are already here, I think all of those things come together to make this a really remarkable monument as it is. Even if it's never finished, I think it's successful. And when it is finished, it is going to be absolutely astounding. Now, one question I want to ask you guys, whoever can answer, is I want you to remember, if you can, what your first impression of this was when you first saw it, and then how you think about it now. Is there a difference?
I think there's a difference after knowing its purpose.
Do you think that difference comes just after knowing its purpose, or do you think that difference also comes because you took the time to look at it closely and think about it on purpose?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both of those things for sure.
All right, good, excellent. Now, the intent of using of applying these 4 tools of artistic critique is not to make you a fan of the art. What the intent is to help you, at the very least, to appreciate the work that went into it. So, whether or not you come away really desiring to go and see the Crazy Horse Monument, that doesn't really make any difference, as long as after you spend the time applying these tools, you can at the very least appreciate the effort of the person who made it originally. I think that's great. Sometimes, sadly, when you apply these tools, you realize that the person just did a half-assed job, and it's really disappointing. And I think in those cases, when we think about it critically, we get kind of disappointed, because you can also, when you start analyzing it, you can also imagine that there was a lot of promise to it that the person just ignored because they took a half-assed stab. Now, on the other side of that, who is always going to be your harshest critic for any work that you do?
Ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And when you apply the tools of artistic critique to your own work, it's a really good way. If you're not satisfied with something, or you don't think it's quite there yet, this is a really good way to critically examine what you're doing so that you can find ways to improve it. But when you do that, it's absolutely imperative that you pretend it's the first time you've ever seen it. And I'm absolutely serious about that, because I've seen more often than not, when people have done that, they've realized that the effort that they've put out was really worthwhile. And when we evaluate something as to whether or not it's successful, sometimes the evaluation is simply, did I learn from doing this? And whether or not you ever want to show what you did to somebody else, whether or not you want to carry it in your arms and run screaming into the parking lot, light it on fire and stamp on it, doesn't make any difference. If you learned something from it, and if it increased your skills, then it is successful. So that's something really important to learn about. I've had several times when people have done critiques of their own work, when they pretend that it's somebody else's and look at it critically and are very serious about it, they realize how good they truly are at what they do. And it's kind of fun to see the realization of an artist who is so self-critical, realizing, wow, I actually do good work. And I hope you guys have that experience. Now, as the next thing that I wanted to talk about, well, and I hope, like I said, I hope everybody appreciates that going through this process, like I said, whether or not you actually enjoy the stuff when you're done looking at it and applying these 4 steps, if you walk away with the realization that somebody did spend some serious time on this, or you walk away realizing that somebody could have been a little bit more serious about it, it's still a valuable process. And even if the only thing you get out of something like this is appreciation for the effort made, then I still think the process is valid. But can you guys see how this can potentially help you in pretty much any other endeavor? You apply this to a patient's condition and treatment, or to how things are set up in a classroom, or say you're a manager at a toy store, and you're using this to critique how people have set up the toys. Can you see how this can be adapted to pretty much any situation?
Yes.
All right, good. I think this is really valuable. It helps us to apply the models of critical thinking to other things other than just art. Now, if we go back to the modules really quickly, we can see that there's modules applying the tools of artistic critique. I'm not going to worry about doing this just yet. I think by the end of September, we'll have some work that we can do with this. And I'm seriously considering, well, I think that I will. You probably can see on module 2, there isn't a discussion set up. And I just set up module 4, which is actually supposed to be module 3. But I just set up the next module as well, and there isn't a discussion for that either. I'm thinking is that since this is an online course, what I will do is set up a discussion for each of these modules with the only thing you have to do is just upload an image of your piece, and then you'll get a couple points. So, and if you want to talk about it, you can talk about it too. But I think if we just do that, provide a discussion so you can upload your finished piece, best picture, put it in its best light, then people will have an index of material that they can draw from when they go to that critiquing somebody else's work. What do you guys think about that?
I think that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Sounds great
All
to
right,
me.
great. Excellent. So that is the next thing that I want people to just have in the back of their minds. But the next thing I wanted to cover was the whole idea of being a diversity collaborator. And it looks like, Nick, yours is the only input that I see. And that's totally fine. I'm just hoping that everybody else does this. And with Nick's entry, I want to share the screen so you can see his entry. And Nick, if it's okay, I would like you to talk about, I'll ask you questions and have you talk a little bit about what you've done and how you feel it applies. Oh, hey, Emily, nice to see you. So I'm going to share the screen on this.
Whoops.
Okay, can you guys see this? I'm sharing the discussion and Nick's entry is the thing that's being shown. Now, your idea of the device art being used as a divisive tool, can you talk about that a little bit, Nick?
Sorry, I forgot I had myself muted. Is that in paragraph 1 or 2? Because I have to read.
Okay, I would like you to talk a little bit first about your example of art being used as a divisive tool, and then we'll talk a little bit about art, your example of art being used as a unifying tool.
I'll start with unifying first because it's a bit more simpler.
Okay.
Art can unify people in numerous ways. It can be either cultural, spiritual, and someone just finds it on the internet one day and just shares it with their friend, their spouse, or other friend. And it could just get spread out more. And technically, that's just another way of bringing people together to express their opinions on the art or their emotion.
Okay, so you're not talking about a specific piece of art that was designed to be unifying. You're talking about just the use of art in general as something that can be unifying because people respond to it and then want to share what makes it special to them. That's an interesting idea because I hadn't really considered that perspective when I set this assignment up. So I think that's really a good perspective.
Whenever I do like, sorry.
No, that's okay.
You can go first.
I was going to say, how many other people have discovered that art can be used pretty much as an excuse to bring you closer to somebody else or to connect you with somebody that you may not necessarily connect to otherwise. Has anybody else had that experience?
Yeah, I have.
Can you share it?
Yeah, so my parents were mission presidents in Ukraine. And so I got to go over there and live with them over there for a little while. But when I was over there, I got to paint a piece of them in traditional Ukrainian clothing. And then I did another piece where my mom is helping my niece into traditional Ukrainian clothing. And it just helped me feel culturally closer to the people. And it also helped me feel closer to my family.
That's a pretty cool example. And this is sharing art as you're sharing during the creation of it. That's very cool. Very nice. one of the examples that I found too, and it's a lot of history, I think, is just made up by people. And the reason why we accept it as history is because their publishers were better. But kind of a cynical view. But what's really interesting to me is this idea that the three groups, the three genetic groups that came together to form modern humans, they were the Cro-Magnon, which you've heard about, the Neanderthals, which you've heard about, and the Denisovans, which you probably have not heard about. Have any of you heard of the Denisovans?
No, but my brain's telling me, yeah, you have.
Well, the Denisovans, the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals, a lot of their tools and fossils have been found in Europe, and the Denisovans, a lot of their fossils and tools have been found in Russia. And the name from each of those groups comes from the area that the first fossil associated with that group was discovered. Each of these groups have specific traits. Like the Cro-Magnon walked fully upright and averaged in height about 5.5, 6 feet or so. And the Denisovans, they also walked upright. They had really strong jaws, and they were a little bit taller, like close to 6.5 feet. And then the Neanderthals, they averaged in height, they were a little bit stockier, and they averaged in height right around 5 feet or so. Some of the traits are Cro-Magnon, most likely they're the ones that have black colored hair. Denisovans most likely had brown and blonde colored hair, and the Neanderthals most likely had red colored hair. Now, what's interesting about that is the assumption has been for a long time by anthropologists, paleoanthropologists, that when these groups interacted, they always got into fights. And the reason why the modern humans share so many traits with Cro-Magnon is because Cro-Magnons were the ones that killed the others. But the reality is their genetic traits that are identifiable by their fossil remains show up in the spectrum of humanity all across the world. And what is really interesting is that more and more, as sites are being found where these people could have or would have interacted, is that you can find these sites where it looks like archaeological remains or tools or equipment made by one group is being cared for by another group. Technology was shared. Clothing technology, tool technology, those kinds of things. There's a good chance that tattooing that was found on the Iceman, who was most likely a Cro-Magnon, found in the in the Alps several years ago. That tattooing may very well have come from knowledge that the Neanderthals had. So there is evidence that shows that these three groups interacted with each other, which, thankfully they did, because that's what produced modern humans, these three genetic families coming together. And we could probably argue that tools and clothing and stuff like that aren't necessarily art, but anything that people made, they made so that it looked good, and it was made to last. And it's fascinating that our ancestors, tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago, when they created their stone tools, they used the same golden ratio that the Greeks did when they created their beautiful vases and their sculptures. And we still use the same ratio today to create things that are visually pleasing. I just think that that's really interesting. Sorry, Nick, I just got on a rant. But okay, Nick, can you share with us what you found that shows that art can be used as a divisive tool?
Yeah, because as I had said in my first paragraph, division can also separate us if we don't like. I'm gonna go back to my unifying. And if two people are like having a conversation between one piece of art, they could have a quite heated argument and end up getting separated from that because they don't agree about one another's opinions of this art piece. And another way is like, you know how in some police shows they would say, get a police sketch artist. We
Right.
can't like, we'd have to like separate them from us. I don't know if this is actually true, but I would think that we would have to separate them from us and think of them as just a person and remember their details.
So you're thinking of the person as an object rather than an individual.
In a way, yes.
Yeah, I think so, and that relates directly to that the racial identification chart used by Soviet police, where the biggest difference among all these individuals is their hairstyle, and it just I don't know. On one hand, it's kind of humorous, but on the other hand, it's really really sad. But yeah, absolutely, art can be the subject that can be a lever for either unifying or dividing. So I hope that you guys, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing that. I hope that over the next week or so, you take the opportunity to go into that discussion and share the kinds of things that you find, where examples of art that is unifying and examples of art that are divisive. And I would like this discussion, to have everybody enter those kinds of ideas by Sunday night, if possible. And I think next week we'll revisit this again and look at it again. And there are some really interesting things that I've come across, like in Finland and Spain. There is street art or graffiti everywhere. But what is really interesting is that people are starting to identify with the graffiti as a valid way of nonviolent expression. And the graffiti is exploding in a lot of places, but it's become this kind of organic art form that everybody can connect over, which I think is absolutely fascinating, because it wasn't that long ago when graffiti was only considered vandalism and destruction of property, and it was heavily patrolled as being damaging as well as illegal. And I think it's fascinating that in some countries, the graffiti in areas has become a really powerful unifying force. But yeah, so as you guys go forward, submit your ideas as to, or submit your examples and why you feel that your observations are valid for art as both unifying and divisive from a racial perspective. Now, I think I mentioned before that most groups of people that identify themselves as members of a culture or a society will see everybody outside of that society as somebody else or an other or a stranger. But what's really interesting to me is that those identifiers have usually been more culturally based or tribally based. And it wasn't really until the late 1700s, specifically, or right around the 1700s, late 1700s, where an awareness of race as a divider really started picking up steam. And it's interesting to me that's true because in my observation, just in North America, we had the people that were stolen from Africa and forced as slaves, owned as chattel. And then you also had the indentured servants, which were generally Caucasians from Europe that wanted to get to the US. Legally, the situation was set up so that their ticket was paid for by a family over in the United States. And then they would come to the US and work the value of that ticket off as basically labor on a farm, for example. That was what it was legally on paper, but functionally, it became slavery as well. Because for all intents and purposes, even though legal terminology was different, these people from Europe were owned by the families that held their name until, and I say until in air quotes, until their ticket was paid off, because there was no regulation from the families. The families could very easily charge their room and board against the wages that were supposed to be paid against the cost of the ticket. So these people were essentially owned by a lot of the families in the United States, or at least in the colonies at that time. The biggest difference between the Black African slaves and the white European indentured servants was that, for the most part, the indentured servitude did not carry on to the children. But these two groups, as they were interacting, they were doing the same jobs in the same areas, in the same environments. It seems that the people that owned them wanted to continue the economic situation the way it was, and there are some very strong suggestions that race started entering the national conversation at about this time of realization to further separate the two different plights, the plight of the indentured servant and the plight of the owned person. And it seems fairly consistent as well in other areas where colonizing was taking place, that colonizers began by suggesting and then writing about and enforcing separation of value to the individual by their race. So the idea that we have today of race, there's only one race, it's the human race. Everything else is cosmetic. And the idea that people are different fundamentally because of the cosmetic, their cosmetics, essentially, the view of their skin, that seems to be a fiction that was developed and perpetrated by colonizers. And we can argue about that if we want to, but that awareness does seem to be pretty consistent. And what's really horrifying and sad is that this thing that was generated as a fiction is, well, we react to it like it's reality, and we can't really help it. And that's a discussion that I hope we can have with ourselves, and realize that one of the big roles of art can be as a healing or unifying element to our cultural network, and it never endangers a person's success as an artist to celebrate and support the success of somebody else, of another view or another artist. In fact, if we look at history, the cultures that really celebrated diversity and welcomed diversity became very rich and abundant, and lasted for a significant amount of time, and had a lot of really good benefits to them. I'm thinking of Ottoman Turkey from about the mid 1400s to about 1900 or so. I mentioned in the example that I gave for art as a unifier, they were particularly powerful and particularly beneficial because they accepted and embraced all sorts of different cultures. They kind of had to, because Turkey is that bridge between Asia and Europe, and Africa as well. But by having to embrace diversity, they really gave themselves a lot of power. And we can see that in all other cultures that were very strong as well. So, something to think about and consider as we go forward. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys find out and share as part of that assignment. We don't have an awful lot of time left, but I did want to What do you guys think about those things that I was just talking about and sharing with you? What are your responses?
I thought it was just really interesting to learn what's happened over the years before we came around and how bad it was in a long time ago.
Well, and what's really sad is that some of the really bad stuff happened relatively recently too. Um, and I can't remember exactly the year. I thought it was between 1860 and 1880 in San Francisco. There was a policeman that was killed in Chinatown. And over the next week or so, over a third of the Chinese population of San Francisco was murdered. And this is something that doesn't show up in typical history books. Most people don't know about it. But at the time, it was a big enough story that Congress actually passed a law that people from China could not become US citizens, even though anybody else could. People from China could not be US citizens until about World War II. So for a significant length of time, a whole segment of the population could not have access to full citizenship, even though that is one of the fundamental promises of the United States. And it was a decision based on this idea of race. I'm just going to share one other thing about that with you that I thought was really interesting. My mom grew up in Southeast Washington State, and that's where I grew up as well. But Southeast Washington was where the nuclear reactors that prepared the material for the atomic weapons of the Manhattan Project. That's where that material was. I forget what the word is. Clarified. I think that's what it is. That's where like the plutonium and uranium were cleaned up and purified, and then assembled into components that could be used for the explosive elements of those bombs. Well, the Japanese knew about that, knew what was going on, and they sent high altitude balloons with incendiary devices on it into the Northwest. And these devices were designed to make landfall in eastern Washington and northern Idaho and northeastern Oregon. So a lot of those areas, there were forest fires constantly during World War II as the Japanese were trying to destroy they were breeder reactors. That's what they were. The breeder reactors for the Manhattan Project. Well, the 555th Paratrooper Squad was an all Black American paratrooper squad that when they were training as paratroopers, they were not allowed to use the same equipment as their white counterparts until their white counterparts had gone to bed. So the 555th were entirely trained at night. So they during their training, they hardly got any sleep at all because they were also expected to do all their duties during the day. The really sad part about this is that the administration over them decided that these Black men were not qualified because they were Black to carry weapons into Europe. So they were barred from fighting in Europe. Instead, they were sent to Washington State, Southeast Washington, and connected with the Manhattan Project. And their whole job during World War II was to use their paratrooping skills to jump from airplanes and fight forest fires throughout eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and northeastern Oregon. my mom remembers meeting these men, and my grandpa, her father, he grew up racist. That meeting these men and just the way he talks about interacting with them completely changed his life. And he was no longer was a racist after befriending these gentlemen. And my mom grew up seeing these guys as the embodiment of Captain America, which, it doesn't have an awful lot to do with art, but I do think it gives a little bit of a perspective on when we choose to open ourselves up to ideas of unification as opposed to going out of our way to find opportunities to be divisive. I just thought that was really interesting. All right, moving forward, I would like to know, how are you guys doing with the defining volumetric form with line project? How are you guys doing with your wire?
I just finished up with my sketches. Now I just got to do the wire part.
Okay, all right. And your wire, because of a mix-up with your kit, that should hopefully get to you pretty soon. It should be going out tomorrow, so you should be getting it, I'm thinking Friday or Saturday. How far along have anybody else gone? Emma, Emmeline, or Emily? How far along have you guys gotten with your wire work?
I've actually started working on, with my wire on the sculpture itself.
Is it a little bit frustrating?
It's actually really frustrating.
Okay, because I'm going to tell you a secret, and it's not going to be a happy secret, and I'm sorry, but when you start working on this, if it's not very frustrating, I don't think you're doing it right. It is. It can be a struggle. As you're working on this, though, there are things that you can find on the internet that are, and I believe I included a video as well that shows how to work on this. But if you want to see more of how people work with wire, let me know, and I will send out some more YouTube videos on this as well. And if we need to extend the due date for this project, I'd be happy to do that. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that our wire work, if you turn it around in three-dimensional space, it's interesting from every angle. So we're not building a drawing that's flat. We're building a drawing that fills a volume. The other thing to be mindful of is we want to make sure that this thing is sturdy enough to stand on its own. And I believe everybody has pliers in their kit. I would also recommend, when you are working on this wire, wear some gloves. If you have gardening gloves, wear your gardening gloves, because the bits of wire can be a little bit pokey. And just be really careful when you are moving with the wire, with your pliers. If you don't hold the wire right and you pinch it a little bit too hard and it slips, you can pinch yourself pretty bad, and it smarts like the dickens. It will wake you up very quickly. So I want you to be careful with it. But think of those two things as you work on this. One is it needs to be interesting regardless of how you move it around. You need to be able to see that it fills volume. So that means you have bits of wire that go out in every angle and direction. Like in the examples, I'm going to share my screen and show the examples. Give me just a short 17, 20 minutes here. I want to revisit these examples really quick so you can kind of see that.
While you pull those up, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
In some of the examples on the assignment, if I'm thinking of the right thing, it talks about creating an animal. Does it necessarily have to be an animal or just something interesting?
No, it does not need to
Okay.
be an animal. I think two of the best examples. Does everybody see this page now?
Yes.
Okay. I think that this pair of shoes is a wonderful example. It's excellent because it's interesting in all dimensions. You know, it's definitely not flat. We have things that are coming out and kind of activating the space around it. And it's also sturdy enough that it looks like it's not going to collapse under its own weight. And that's what we want to go for. Now this unnamed science fiction movie Walker here, this is sturdy enough and it's balanced, so it looks like it can walk. And I really like that about this, that it's strong enough. It's also interesting in every dimension. One of the things I don't like about this is that these sides are really open and plain. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's what the artist wanted to do. But this, you can see that this is very three-dimensional as well. And then the Popeye next to it, what's really fascinating about this is that the legs on this are very three-dimensional. They're almost like tubes. The torso, same way. But the arms were made as relatively two-dimensional. And then the person twisted and folded them a bit so that they activated in three-dimensional space. So think about that. And I like that this fish as well. It is really an interesting piece. It activates three dimensions. This bird cage, the only thing I don't appreciate about it is that the center is really, you know, this top part is way too plain and the center part is really empty. And maybe if you want to do something like this or something similar, it might be interesting to do a really interesting cage or a really interesting bird and then do something with like a different color of wire or something else inside of it. That might be fascinating. But so you don't have to be limited to the wire that you've gotten in the kit. If you want to add to it, you can use other things too. But it does not have to be an animal. And I am sorry if I left the animal term in the description. I'm sorry, but it does not have to be an animal. It can be other things. Did that address your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Professor, I also have a quick question, if it's okay.
Okay.
So you mentioned that it needs to be able to stand on its own. I'm wondering if we would be able to hang it, like from fishing wire or something, or if it actually has to stand.
I said stand on its own. I mean, it needs to be able to support and sustain its own weight. So if you want to hang it from somewhere, if it holds its own shape, then I think that'll be just fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on that? All righty. I'm gonna go on then. Next week I want to see what people have done for the being a diversity collaborator, and we'll talk more about that. When we start talking about ideas of, or when we start talking about subjects that intersect with race and differences between people, and I think that this can apply to a lot of conversations. I think one of the dangers that we have is we assume that the way that we have done it or the way that we're used to doing it is the way that the universe intended it always to be done. And I know we've all met people like this, where if you don't think the way that they do, they think you're an idiot. And that's not the case at all. I mean, if people are different, people think differently, they look at things differently because they're different. It doesn't mean that one person's stupid and the other one's smarter. And a lot of the time, race relations and diversity, a lot of the times that can fit in a category of, because my great grandpa behaved this way and my great grandpa, my grandpa did, and my dad did, that's the way I've got to be too. And a lot of the times people aren't even aware of their own behavior, because just like a fish, how many times do you think a fish is even aware of the water it's swimming in? I don't think it is. And I think that that can be used as an allegory for our own behavior. And until somebody points it out, or until we realize something, something happens and we're forced to realize that a behavior is separate than ourselves, we don't really see that there's a problem there. And we don't understand that it's okay for other people to have different points of view. And so that's something that I think is really good to hold in the back of our minds. If we all critique the same piece of art, even if we all went through the same 4 steps, and even if we are all speaking the same language, do you think any 2 of us would critique it in the same way?
No.
No. If we critique it differently than somebody else, does that make one of us stupid and the other one smart?
No.
No, it doesn't. It just means that we have different perspectives. Did I share with you guys the ancient story about the wise people and the elephant? This is a story that is shown up in cultures in India, throughout the continent of Africa, Eastern Europe, and there are even similar stories among cultures in the Americas and elsewhere around the world. But the story regarding the elephant is essentially this. 5 wise people were brought together, and all 5 of them were blind. They were brought to an elephant, asked to experience this creature, and then describe what they experienced. One of the wise people came to the ear, another one came to the trunk, one came to a leg, another one came to the side, and the 5th one came to the tail. Now they were all blind, and so the only way that they could experience the elephant was by feeling. The one who felt the ear said, "Well, this is a tremendous fan. It's the biggest fan I've ever felt." The one who came to the trunk said, "This is a large snake." The one that came to the leg said, "This is a tree." The one that came to the side said, "This feels like the edge of the side of a cliff or the side of a mountain." And then the one that came to the tail said, "Well, it's just a rope." Were any of the 5 wrong? And conversely, were any of the 5 right? What do you think the moral of that story is?
Maybe that people experience things from their own perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the truth, if there is such a thing as capital T truth, I think the truth is much bigger than what any single person or any single group of people can possibly comprehend and communicate about. So, what is interesting to me about that story is that it illustrates the fact that all 5 of them were right in sharing their experience that they had, and all 5 of them also did not have the full picture. So they each saw things from their own perspective. And I think that that's something really important to consider. Now, what expands a person, what makes us better as human beings and as artists, is when we work, not necessarily to expand our vision to encompass somebody else's perspective as well. We don't necessarily have to do that. But when we can get to the point where we can appreciate other people's perspective, when we can value their unique contribution from their own point of view, and we can even get to a point where we can possibly celebrate it, then I think that that is really expansive and helps you as an artist. Far from threatening the work that you do, far from threatening your identity, I think it just makes you a stronger artist and a stronger person in general. Now, we only have a couple minutes, and I wanted to share just a view of this next module. And I realize that the module is numbered out of sequence, so please don't get upset or anything like that. We changed the sequence of them, and I just left it the way it was number-wise. But this is module 4, and it's called Structure with the Skin. As we look at this, on the one hand, can everybody see my arrow in these two pictures, or these three pictures?
Yep.
Okay. So on the right-hand side, we have Eiffel's Tower. And this at the time, of course, was by far the tallest structure in the world. And then on the far left, we have the Statue of Liberty that appears to be solid. It appears to be a solid statue from the exterior. And the Eiffel Tower, you can hear the wind whistling through it because it seems to be just girders. Now, in between, we have the girding, the drawing and plans of the girding that was used to support the copper skin of the Statue of Liberty. What we are doing in this next module is creating something with both a structure and a skin where both elements are equally important, where the structure is visually and of course structurally important, and the skin that we apply to it is also just as important to the overall success of the sculpture. Now I'm going to, I took off the screen share a bit because I'm switching to another page to show you some student examples of this. And I'm going to describe what this is. I don't think I finished editing it from the summer term. So if the description of this doesn't quite match what I am saying, I'm going to be editing it so it does. Let's see. Okay, we're almost done. All right. Now I'm going to be doing the screen share. When technology works, it is really astonishing. When it doesn't, it really sucks. Okay, almost there. I know that everybody's super excited. There we go. Okay, can everybody see this?
I can.
Okay, good. For this, remember the Statue of Liberty was all covered with skin and the Eiffel Tower was only the girders? What you're going to be using is you have like popsicle sticks and things like that in your kit, and you can also use stuff that you have at home. People have used, we'll talk about this more next week as well, but people have used things like pencils and pens. People have used skewers. One of the really cool solutions I've seen is that a couple people, they made their girders or their support structure by taking that origami paper, putting glue on it, and then rolling them up into tight little straws. Once the glue dried, they became incredibly durable, and they used those as the supporting girders. And one of the common things that you can see between all three of these images is that the student designed a module, like a building block, and then they put those building blocks together. And each of the building blocks contain both structure elements that you can see clearly and skin elements that you can see clearly. The one that I really like is this one in the middle. This, can you guys see my mouse?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. You can see this, that this is the building blocks that they created, which is a fairly simple shape. And you see they repeated that building block several times. There's a total of 8 of the identical building block. And they put paper in on 2 areas. So they put skin on 2 areas. And then as they put these building blocks together, it spirals around. The reason I like this is that the skin is integral to the structure and appreciation of the overall form. And in some areas, the skin hides, like where my mouse is right here, that the skin is hiding what's behind it. Right here, it's hiding behind it. And then also, even on the same piece, the same building block, the skin on this area supports the girding. It almost frames it. So the skin here is in front of the girding, so we don't see it. And on here, it's behind the girding. So the girding kind of hides some of the skin. So, and when we look at this one on the right, you see that the skin, they changed where they applied the paper over the structure. So in some areas, it's behind the structure. In some areas, it's in front of the structure. I really like that. And on this, you can see that each of these blocks was essentially an oblong, rectangular block. They put cardboard in different areas. In some areas, they didn't. Like in here, the cardboard doesn't completely cover the face. And on this, we can see some of the girding here. We can see some of the structure here. Sometimes it's really hidden. I think on this one, this would be even more effective if perhaps this area of cardboard was on the far side of this block. So we get a similar effect to this. So this is something I want you to anticipate and be thinking about. The idea for this is to build a module or a block that you can repeat and then apply skin to it, either before you assemble them or after everything is all together, and create a structure and skin combination where both are important to the overall form that you're building. One of the mistakes that I've seen students make is they'll just build something with sticks and then cover the entire thing. And that's not what we want to do. We want to have the skin covering some of it and reveal some of it as well. And when we talk about this next week, we'll also talk about the different kinds of materials that we can use. Okay, so I'm anticipating we might extend the due date for this as well, so people have an opportunity to really more fully explore a lot of those kind of avenues. All right, does anybody have any questions about the material that we've covered so far today? If you don't have a question directly yourself, can you imagine a question that somebody else might have in the class?
I've got a quick question.
Okay.
For the wire sculptures, does it need to be one continuous strand of wire, or are we able to like try and cut the wire?
I would prefer you do whatever is most comfortable for you. And that generally means cutting the wire. You have to have a lot of experience with this and do a lot of planning in order to create something like this without cutting any wire. So I would say if cutting wire is going to make it easier on you, go ahead and do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I would also heartily recommend as you work with the wire, wear some sort of eye protection. Be careful with with the materials that you work with, and respect them. And I have my glasses. I wear my glasses all the time. They are also rated as safety glasses because they are made with high impact lenses. I would it would not be a bad thing at all to wear like goggles or gun range protective eyewear, anything like that, because the wire, if you're not really careful, can flip around and stab you. So gloves and eyewear are two things that I would recommend. So that's a very good question. All right, any other questions or observations? All righty. Now, just to warn you, next week when we get together, we're going to have to be a little bit more interactive because we're going to generate a couple lists of items. And if you have any questions about quizzes and things like that, remind me next week. Just as a quick note too, I teach a few classes online. And one thing that I notice sometimes is people get a little bit frustrated with the assignments, and that happens more often when they haven't read the rest of the module. So I would recommend go through each of the modules in the order that things are listed. And I would also recommend watching the video for that week as soon as you can before you dive into the project, because you'll find that a lot of the questions that you have, we discuss during the video. And you'll find that a lot of the questions that you have are also answered with the other material that you read coming before the actual assignments. I mention this particularly because there was a problem with people writing their artist review without referencing the background artist that they're supposed to be writing the review about. That's whenever each of the artist reviews are designed, the questions are designed specifically to be addressed by the artist that you looked at in the section of the module immediately preceding the artist review. And otherwise, it gets really frustrating for everybody. But if there's no questions and you guys are super happy, that's great. I'm so glad that everybody had a good Labor Day weekend. And I really hope you have an absolutely wonderful weekend coming up. And I look forward to talking with everybody again on Wednesday. All right. So I will be seeing you guys, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you.